started. I know we're expecting a few other people and we're running very tight today. So Angela and I will try and tighten it up and keep us on schedule. But welcome. Thank you for coming to our session today. So I am going to start off by sharing some slides with you that we're going to talk to a little bit today. So pending the technology, my session yesterday, I really botched up presenting the slides. So hopefully this goes well. So today, as you would have seen, we're going to talk about why don't our digitally capable students use better information? So our students have access to so much information these days. We're all inundated with lots of information, but we've found in our experience that they're not exactly always using the best information. So what I want to start off with is, Angela, if you would like to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Okay, kia ora koutou. So my name is Angela Feekery, as you said, and I work at the School of Communication, Journalism and Marketing, which is an interesting mix, here at Massey University in Palmerston North in New Zealand. And I've been researching information literacy now since 2010. I came in to do my PhD. I didn't want to pay for it, so I got a scholarship. And the topic was embedding information literacy and active voice into writing. I was a writing tutor at the time. I didn't know what information literacy was, but hey, got the scholarship. And then after a few months, I was like, how can I not know what this is? Having been an educator for 10 years, how do I not know what information literacy is and what my responsibility is as an educator to ensure that my students are becoming information literate learners? So yeah, that's how I came to information literacy research.
Great, thank you. And I'm Patricia Hubbard. Some of you might have heard my intro yesterday, so I'll be a bit more brief. And I'm with the University of Auckland in Auckland, New Zealand, and I've been with the university for about 5 years in different capacities. Previously, I was teaching at US universities, and I'm working on my PhD part-time at University of Auckland as well. And so I connected with Angela through a panel discussion that we did a few months ago together, which was really great. And we found out we had a very common interest in information literacy and how we're preparing our students. And we started talking about some of our commonalities in that and how I've made some changes to our business master's program that we're running at the graduate school in the business school, and how I've been embedding some information literacy. So that's really how we got to this point. And then we decided we wanted to share some of those experiences with you today. And so just a little bit of an overview for us is we want to talk about really exploring information literacy first, and we might say IT sometimes, and that's what we're referring to, and sharing some examples from our context, because Angela and I have very different experiences and different contexts that we've been using this in, as well as we want to identify some opportunities possibly in your context to be using this. And then we'll finish up by reviewing some of the key lessons that we've learned along the way. And so I'll hand over to Angela, and she's going to kick us off with a little bit of a discussion, and we'll be utilizing the whiteboard within Zoom if you haven't done that before.
Okay, so yeah, basically when we talk about information literacy, there's a lot of confusion or misinterpretation, like what are we actually talking about? So we just want to start with, what do you think it is? So what keywords spring to mind? Have you got definitions that you know of? Anything like that? And if you can just sort of type them out onto the whiteboard when it's shared, when Patricia gets it up there, and we'll kind of see what stuff come out spontaneously for your interpretation. So hopefully you can start typing on there.
Yep, so hopefully you see that whiteboard, and if you go up to the top in those settings, you should have more options or view, and it should have an annotate, and that should give you the option to put some text into that whiteboard that I've put up there now.
Annotate's not coming up on my screen.
Mine either.
Do you see any dots or any options at the top of the whiteboard, like a view or an options?
No.
Nope.
The view option's there, but annotate's not on the screen.
Yeah, no, it's not there, Patricia.
We could use the chat window to type if you prefer.
Oh yeah, let's just go ahead and use the chat window. Yep, that sounds good. Yeah,
So
if you just want to pop
Zoom
up.
What was the question again?
We love Zoom.
You can ask Brandon.
Yep. So the question is, what do you think digital and information literacy is?
So if you can just pop in maybe some keywords that come to mind when you think about that, say maybe some skills that you think might come to mind with that. Just pop those into the chat and we'll have a discussion about that.
hopefully tears of joy, Heather.
Yeah, hopefully those are all joyful tears.
I think we all hit the same one in different words.
Oh, optimizing the technology.
What's Tpack?
Heather, what's Tpack?
It's a theory where it's theory, pedagogy, and content knowledge. So it's making, that's what it stands for. And Ms. Mishra, I can't remember the year, but they brought in the idea that technology, and I've talked to other people about this, and even I believe Briggs, the Australian guy, forget his first name, Catherine Tang, I think it's John Briggs. I mean, it's a debatable thing, but it's about the way I interpret it, it's actually making sure the technology doesn't drive the pedagogy. And we as academics, or, you know, are heavy on the content knowledge, which is what we're supposed to be getting across, and using pedagogy to do that. Technology should be a tool to do that, not drive the pedagogy.
Yep, completely agree.
And I agree with Crystal and Martin that I do think my students' initial is to go to Google Scholar, do a search, and then that's the extent of where they go.
Mm-mm.
Well, you're lucky
I'm
to
glad
make it
that-
to even Scholar.
That's what I was just about to say.
No, mine don't use Scholar. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is just Google.
Wikipedia
old
and
Google.
Google, you know?
Yeah. The Google.
They Google indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it looks like here, you know, different sources is coming up, finding and assessing quality information, good from bad. Evaluation comes up again, particularly bias, different perspectives. Yep, sources from the library. Yep, going beyond Wikipedia. And Google searching and not believing what you know. Cool. Yep, so that's the basic of it. So what we're going to do now is just kind of share an information literacy model that I have created. And I'll give you a little bit of context if you want to go to the next slide there, Patricia. Hopefully it's not too small for your eyes. So I was involved in I've done 2 projects on information literacy since completing my PhD, and one was a 2-year project, and the second one was a 3-year project based on collaboration between teachers, secondary teachers, librarians, and then tertiary teachers and librarians as well. So collaborative practice so that we can enhance students' information literacy capabilities. And we found that we were talking in circles and talking about different things. What is this information literacy thing that we're talking about? And so I came across the work of Jane Secker and Emma Coonan, the ANSL New Curriculum for Information Literacy, and they had a model similar to this, but much more basic. And so I kind of expanded that into what these kind of spheres of information literacy are within the tertiary space that I was working within. So the project's called Information Literacy Spaces. And there's a link just down the bottom there to the blog post where I unpack this a little bit more. So the definition, the main definition that's often used is the American Library Association, to be able to find, access and use information. Very, very basic. And a lot more holistic understanding is coming out now. So our meaning definition that we were using in the project was that it is the processes, strategies, skills, competencies, expertise, and ways of thinking that enable individuals to engage with information to learn across a range of platforms, both digital and traditional, to be able to transform the known and discover the unknown. So it's about what we do with that information more than just our ability to access and find it and evaluate it. It's that next step. What we found was, particularly in the secondary sector, the libraries were very underutilized. And I don't know if it's the same in the US, and the librarians were often parent helpers. They weren't trained librarians in that sector. There was a few schools that had trained librarians, but a lot of them just were underutilized. They were getting rid of all their books because they knew students were Googling. So it was quite a scary space for that secondary school context. When they then come into university with this massive big library, huge numbers of databases, they just have no idea. So that transitional space was where we were kind of working. So if we unpack the model a bit, we've got information literacy in the middle. I kind of try to imagine this more as like a 3D model with information literacy as the umbrella over encompassing all these other domains as well. So anything that's in the green bubble, they're kind of common to all of the other domains that we've got here. We kind of put them on the side where we thought they were probably more relevant to what was going on. So academic literacy is academic writing, critical reading, working collaboratively. They often get taught that in first year core papers or core academic writing papers. So that's more how to be a critical reader and writer in that space. But then once they come out of those writing courses, they end up in our disciplinary classes. So they need to know how knowledge is constructed within our disciplines, who has authority in these spaces. We know as academics who we want them to be reading, but can they find them? And we found that reading lists were ignored because they just go to Google. So how do we actually get them to understand how authority works? What are our ways of knowing and thinking, and keeping in mind the epistemologies that we know? I'm involved in organizational communication as well. And at the conference, National Communication Conference in 2018, the hashtag was AllCom0SoWhite, which was coming to the idea of decolonizing the curriculum. So we know that some of the ways of knowing embedded in our practice tend to have a white Western viewpoint on a lot of research spaces. So what are other ways of knowing within our disciplines? And then scholarly communication, how we communicate with each other through journal articles, and then critically analysing. So that's kind of the disciplinary space that we train our students into when they enter our disciplines. But of course, universities now have to prepare people for workplace. So we've got the adult and professional literacy that we can support to, and information literacy really is becoming almost synonymous with lifelong learning. If you're information literate, then you're also a lifelong learner. You can do all those skills that you need. We come into civic responsibility and citizenship here. And I think nowhere more than the US at the moment is this really important. We're seeing such division over there. And, you know, even wearing a mask to keep people from being sick is an issue. So what's our civic social responsibility as citizens towards each other? How are we connected to each other? We've got the pros and cons of social media in there, understanding the social and cultural context that we're working and living within. And then again, workplace information literacy. What do we need to do that in the workplace? And so literature there is basically saying that in the workplace, social sources of information, basically ask someone, is more important than Googling something. And they don't get that so much in the university context. We're expecting them to go and cite sources all the time. So there's a real difference there in what the workplace expects from what we expect. Our financial literacy and health literacy comes into here. And then we go over to the digital space, which is kind of, interwoven into everything. But this is more about cyber safety, behaving well online, developing networks through communication tools, establishing our online identity, and making sure that we respect and appreciate others' identities in these spaces. So it becomes a much more complex space than just finding, evaluating, and using information. So this is where I come to when I talk about information literacy. And we see a lot in the university. First year students get a 50-minute library session, and then they're expected to be able to then do all of this stuff because we took them to the library. So our kind of things like knowing all this, knowing that we have this real responsibility as academics in the disciplines, what do we need to do to ensure that we have information literate learners in our spaces, and that we're actively developing them and not leaving it to chance and osmosis, which is happening. So that's kind of where we're in this information literacy space. You can see it's a very imaginatively named model. I'm going to try and come up with something better. So
I like the name. I think it's perfect.
I'm only one of 5 Feekeries in New Zealand. The other 3 are my husband and children and mother-in-law. So the other 4. So we're very, just us 5 Feekeries in the whole of New Zealand. Okay, so that's kind of the space. So hopefully I've made that clear in a little nutshell. Like so you can read a little bit more about it on the blog, and I am hopefully having an article coming out about it soon and see what the other information literacy researchers think about this idea. So we go to the next slide, Patricia.
Sure.
So based on that, and this is the shared assumption, if you buy into my understanding of it, I haven't alienated half of you already. Just want to have a little bit of a discussion here on if you accept this as an information literacy space, then what are the assumptions that we hold as educators about our students' digital and information literacy capabilities? We think about the space that they're engaging in. So should we just sort of go around each? There's not many of us in here, so should we just give everyone a chance to chime in on this one? Anyone keen to go first? Nope.
I'll go. I mean, I think an assumption that's common among faculty is that the students are so used to going to Google, they think of that as the end to all, and they don't even understand that different search engines are going to produce different results. And the thought of going to the library and looking in the databases or trying to find something more quality, that they don't understand how to ascertain the quality level of the information they're getting. I think those are assumptions that a lot of faculty hold.
One of the things that I do when I teach my classes, or at least that I've always done in face-to-face classes, is to give students additional, I call it contribution credit versus participation, because they're contributing to everyone's learning, for bringing in stories in the news that relate to the course material. And I learned fairly quickly that part of that had to be to ask them where they got it from. And the majority of the good students will give you, will understand often what I'm asking that for, and they will give me good sources, but almost everything else comes from social media. That's where they get their news, which is frightening, really. And that seems to be shared among my colleagues.
Cool.
Yeah, except Facebook is for us old people,
I know. Worse yet, Twitter, the encyclopedia of Twitter.
Yeah.
I've been teaching online for about 8 years, and basically I haven't been into a classroom in about 8 years, apart from doing workshops and things like that. Mind you, this year I will be going into the classroom. It's kicking and screaming because I love the online space. And it was serendipitous that I got here, but at the same time, I've been teaching into, I looked after the Bachelor Business program that we deliver into Open Universities Australia, which is, it's an online platform, and universities across Australia can offer degrees into it. You don't have to qualify. Anybody, it's, bring us your hungry, bring us your poor. Everybody goes in there. So the diversity of students, I had, right now I'm actually teaching a cohort from on campus, but online, which was first time in 5 years, I think. But from that OUA cohort, I had professionals, I had government people, I had people with other degrees looking to upskill into a business degree. And then I had the whole other, we have elite athletes, we have expats, we have incarcerated students. So the continuum is very, very broad. And the students that I've been working with have been super engaged, okay? Like very, very good. And like when we started adapting to Teams about 2 years ago, they embraced it really, really well. I'm now teaching an online cohort on campus, and it's like pulling teeth. Get them engaged. I'm sort of, my basket of tricks is running out.
Digging to the bottom of the basket.
Yeah, I just, and it's a completely different cohort because it's students that have come from school and going to university. And there's, like they're saying that we don't have international students, but if you look, I've got 142 students in my business ethics class right now, if I profile them on their names, there's a lot of international students there. And it's so hard. Like, you assume that they're digitally capable, and they might be digitally capable, but how they use that skill set, I'm not seeing it. You know, they don't seem to be applying it to research skills. And I even do, you know, like, I couldn't stop myself from doing research for them and putting readings up there. But it's all to no avail. And I've posted current topical things. I post, you know, controversial questions. You know, I've posted questions about the legality of marijuana, things like that. Nothing. So, yeah, I didn't mean to bitch and moan about that here.
No, that's good.
That's all relevant.
My message is that this assumption that particularly the younger cohort coming through school, and maybe it's Australian phenomena, I don't think so when I talk to others, but that assumption that they're digital natives, you know, and they're not using the technology well.
Yeah. And I actually think these assumptions go both ways. I'm teaching on some new programs where I'm used to everyone assumes our young students are digital natives and that they'll be able to figure it all out and we can throw anything at them. But it's switching to where now everyone's making the assumption that these new students will have no information when it comes to this digital space. And so it's really making that swap. But I said, can we really make that assumption? Can we say just based on the little bit we know about these students, we're assuming they know nothing? So I think it's interesting those assumptions really go both ways.
Before I look at the comment about the students not reading, Crystal, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, thank you. You know, I would agree, you know, with what's being said here. You know, I think there continues to be assumptions. Well, and, you know, with some students, they're going to go, you know, what I call now above and beyond, you know, and get, you know, proper sources and really do the reading. And I'm thinking about, Angela and Patricia, you had been in that in a talk yesterday, and you had brought up the you know, sort of the commodity now of education. And I feel like sometimes for some students, it's, you know, it's transactional. And, you know, let me put a citation in here because I know she's expecting it. You know, maybe I read one sentence and it fits with what I'm saying and I'm going to cite it. And there was no, you know, there's no real reflection. And that's just frustrating. It's like, oh, you just, you know, just read. And I don't know if that's because social media, or, you know, all information now is just these little snippets, you know, tiny little things that, you know, to read a 10 or 15 or, you know, gosh forbid, 25-page article is just, you know, way over the top. So yeah.
And I think they call those the info bites. They're just getting info bites rather than that. And one of the things that we found working with the secondary school teachers is they had that assumption that their students won't read. They won't read. And they were kind of then giving them information that they'd already summarized and taking the key points out of. And the students never saw the original text. So the idea of being able to say, is it an academic journal article? Is it a newspaper? Is it a magazine? Is it a blog? What is it? So they were really decontextualizing where that information came from. And when we look at evaluation shortly, that's such an important thing to know as the basis and the context of where that information was created. So our secondary school teachers were doing the hard work for the students.
Yeah. And I think it's like Melissa said, we barely get them to read the syllabus right out of the gate. How many times do we ask them to read that? And then they ask a question that's directly related to something we answer in that.
I can buy t-shirts with it's in the syllabus on it.
Yeah, exactly. And
Martin, sorry, I just saw Martin. Did you have anything to add?
Yes, I have. I was just going to. I actually would think way back. Angela, you were talking about the fact in where they were then going to businesses and they would actually start to ask people rather than read things. It occurs to me that that works because in businesses there are hierarchies of trusts and hierarchies very often of what is authoritative. In a business, you are going to find that you know the expert on this tool or this approach or this piece of software. Very often, it might be a guy who is based in a sixth floor office in Chicago, but you know who is trustworthy about that. And part of what I think we're trying to, whether it seems to me it's the same challenge. I haven't really thought about this, but the same challenge to do with understanding who and what is authoritative. It's having some way of judging and assessing, and it's actually, because we've been doing it, because we do it as part of our jobs, I suspect that we underestimate quite how difficult it is. I'm not even convinced it's a generational thing. I think it's something which I'm going to put in the chat box. The example which we come across quite a lot is that there may be somebody who is writing something which is actually authoritative, but you have to mediate it through the fact that they've got a product to sell. The product might be a computer system, or it might be a piece of consultancy, or something like that. So as soon as you start, it's really interesting, this understanding what sort of subtleties.
And I think too that the change that I've seen, if I think back to my university experience, we were given books of readings, and we did all of our assignments based on those books of readings. Accessing information yourself might have been 1 or 2 books from the library in hard copy if someone hadn't rushed in and taken them all out, but there was no digital access. There were still cards there. So now, because students can access everything, I feel like teachers have pulled back from providing that core basic reading material. And if we do provide it, unless we give them the direct link to it, so a reading list, and they actually have to go and work out how to find those things, never happens. So if we can put them directly into their learning space, they will read them. But interesting, a couple of things that I just thought of with the research stuff is the Citation Project out of the US. Not sure if you've heard of the Citation Project. Sandra Jameson, Rebecca Moore-Howard, and Tricia Service are working on the Citation Project, and I'm actually doing a version of it here in New Zealand. But they found that 75% of source citations came off the first page of the source, regardless of length, with majority of them coming out of the abstract. So students were citing the abstract rather than actually reading the document. And it didn't matter how long the text was, they didn't really get past page 5. So they found very few citations anywhere further along the document, unless they'd gone straight to the conclusion. So it was a real sort of insight into how students were tackling with the documents that they were reading. So very little in-depth detailed reading happening. So if we can know that, then how do we get the students to engage, to read? And then the other comment we also get, the assumption is students only focus on assessment. So the learning that happens along the side to prepare them for that assessment, they don't care about. So unless we assess their capability, they're not going to focus on it. They'll just use those old habits that get them by and get them through. And I don't know if Australia is the same, but certainly New Zealand, our funding model at universities changed a few years back from enrolment to completion. So if our students don't complete, we don't get paid for them. I think 70% have to get through for TEC to give us our money. So you can imagine the shift that's been in approaches to, we can't, if they enroll and they pay for them and they fail, who cares? But now it's like, actually, if they don't pass, we don't get paid.
Has that put grade pressure on the faculty to not fail people?
Yeah, that's a whole different presentation.
Well, I know that's a whole different conversation. I just, to me, that will be a natural outcome, a side effect of that policy.
I think it's doing more to ensure that they pass. We don't want to lower our standards.
Right.
And I think the University of Canterbury in Christchurch did implement if you don't get a B+, you can't go through to the second year in some programs.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that necessarily meant we had a whole lot more B+ students. I think to get a B+, lessened in quality. It was easier to get the B+ than previously. Otherwise, they had no second year students.
Right.
So,
and that's what happened in our master's program, is they only progress if they have that average.
So there. Okay, so we've got that shared understanding. We kind of have these assumptions around their ability to actually go deeper than the first few results of Google that pop up, their engagement in reading, which we perceive as not happening to the extreme that we would like, or even their ability to determine authority. Like, how do they know what stuff they should be reading? So what we're often finding in my courses and students prior to things we put into place was there was just all this random information. There was no connectedness between it. And when we look at that scholarly communication part of that model, we know as scholars that this is how we talk to each other. So reference lists and cited by, that's our thread of conversation about a particular topic. Whereas they're getting random bits that are disconnected, trying to put the pieces together. Whereas actually, if you read in a particular way and search in a particular way, those pieces are put together for you.
Yeah.
And so how do we get that across to our students? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Talking
I
about
think-
this, Angela reminded me, I gave my Master of Human Resource students a fairly lengthy journal article, which to them lengthy is more than 15 pages. But it was a really great one for their kind of theoretical foundation. And the comment I got the next week was, it was too long, we couldn't read it. We couldn't possibly read it, understand it, use it. Could you just tell us what you want us to get out of it? And I died a slow death inside that they didn't read this wonderful article that I thought would help them so much.
Okay, so
I think
yeah, I'm just really
going
conscious of
on with
time as well. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
I was going to say, I think even before you get to giving them the articles, one of the first things that has to penetrate is that, you know, it is important to check facts and possibly theories, etc. It's not just their opinion. And that's the first step that I still struggle with most of the time.
Particularly in a context of alternative facts.
Well, or just, well, this is what I think. And, you know, it might be, you know, one of the, in a country where we have alternative facts, you know, and are that individualistic, you know, well, my opinion is as good as anybody else's. It's what I think. So there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just in the next part of the presentation, we're just going to share with you, because we're talking about how we explicitly make this obvious in our courses. So I'm just going to share some examples with you of what I've done through my own teaching and research. This is examples of what's gone on. And then Patricia will give some time for questions about it. And then Patricia will share some of her ideas. And then we're going to get you thinking about your context and things that you might be doing or might consider doing after sort of this being prompted. I recognize at these kind of conferences, we're kind of preaching to the converted. You're here because you're engaged scholar teachers. So that's not always the case. But yeah, I just want to share some ideas with you. So just starting here, like I said, 2010, I did my PhD. I worked with the environmental planning degree here at Massey. The beauty of this program was that it was cohort based. So they come in at first year and they work together through the 4-year program, pretty much with the same students, around 25 students. So a small program, and they tend to go through the degree together. So it's quite a different context in the Bachelor of Business that I'm in, where students can take so many papers in so many different orders. There's no thread that runs through the whole program. So the program that I work with was, contextually awesome for putting a thread of information literally through the whole program. So what we did was they used to have a 15-minute library lecture in first year. So because it had the first year paper was also an elective for geography and other courses, it'd have about 100 students in the lecture. There'd be in a lecture theatre, the librarian would come in and speak for about 50 minutes on what was at the library. And that was it. That's all they got around information literacy. So no hands-on workshops, nothing like that. So what we put into it was 2-hour library workshops, taking 4 or 5 groups out of the workshop in the first week of their workshop time rather than the lecture time. And then we added in a voluntary refresher at 3rd year. And the teacher that introduced that one, he was very adamant that they had to use 10 quality sources in their essay. And if there was any rubbish, the maximum they would get is a C for their assignment. So he kind of gave them the impetus to get along and get a refresher if they'd forgotten since first year what the library could do. And every time I go to a library workshop, something's new. The library field is updating all the time. The database is slightly changed. They've got a new way of accessing stuff. They've brought 3 or 4 things into one space and you search it a little bit differently. So going back repetitively gave them that chance. And then in 4th year, they'd come to their honours level year and they had to do a paper, a full 15,000 word research project, which again stepped them up from the expectations of 3rd year. So we took them back again with their research topic in mind, and they searched specifically for that topic. So it was far less generic than the other sessions had been. So we sort of fed them through and did it developmentally rather than just repeating what they'd had at each workshop. So that was the first kind of step that we took. the two sort of images that you can see here, they're going to be a bit of text on these slides. I don't expect you to read it. It's just examples I'll pull out. The first one, the healthy resources pyramid, this is the metaphor that we use for the first year students. Basically talking about the fruit and veggies at the bottom, the scholarly stuff, up to the popular books and magazines and podcasts, Wikipedia at the top. That's your junk food, your McDonald's. And that if you're going to feed your brain all that crap, then you're going to have that as your outcome. So you need to eat your fruit and veggies in terms of your academic information that you're accessing. And that, you know, the higher up the pyramid, the easier it was to find. The further down, that took a bit more work and effort to be able to access those documents as well. So yeah, just sort of gave them a sense of what this looked like. And we also recognized in the official part of it, there's government information. Planning students obviously have to know government related information. So we had another triangle in there. So the fact sheets were the popular down to the independent research projects that were being done by non-governmental and governmental organizations. So yeah, we kind of unpacked it and gave them a metaphor to hang that on. The second part that we had in that first year, but also reiterated at third year, was that idea of research as a conversation. And that this is how we talk to each other. You're not just reading a journal article, you're reading a conversation that's taking place between researchers who've come before and how this current person is extending on and developing those ideas. And then if you use the cited by function in the databases, you can see what people have been saying about that research since, or how they've been using it since. So we brought that into there with these little images here, you know, like on the, you know, smaller arguments challenging a larger one. This is what we've always known, but if we put this and this together, actually we get a new perspective. So we sort of talk them through that idea of that research as a conversation. So that's just away from here's a database, here's how you do keyword searching, here's how you get some stuff. So we really upped what we were talking about in those workshops. Then we went on to the assessment and reflective learning, embedding that in there because we know they focus on assessment. So what you can see here is kind of the pre-research, what the assessment looked like, and then what the assessment looked like after I'd been interfering with them. So what we ended up adding into the first year course, we added the source justification, and I'll show you that in a little bit what that looked like. But that came in 3 weeks before the essay was due, because you can see the essay overall was worth 30%, but 10% of it came from finding 5 key sources that you were going to use and justifying why you were going to include that as evidence for the argument you were trying to make. And we did that 3 weeks before the essay to get them starting early, rather than starting the essay the night before. So yeah, so we added in that source justification. That was kind of the main change there. The other first year course that was running, we took away the group presentation early in the course, and we got them to reflect on their values, because values was a really important part. This was planning in the environment, which had a lot of values-based decisions that planners need to make. So we got them to reflect on their values, and there they got a draft submission. So this was focusing them on their writing. We gave them feedback on whether they were writing clearly and concisely or not. And then the IMAP was a visual depiction of their research process. So where did they start? What keywords did they use? What databases did they use? Where did they find it? So it was a visual image of that process, plus we gave them a writing workshop as well. So all of these things were added in to try and focus them on how they write and find and use that information that they've got into there. The second year course with Fran, we put in a professional reading and learning log. So students had to access a reading each week and write up where they found it, do a complete APA reference, and then say how it was a planning issue or how planners might focus that. So it was a newspaper article. We gave them a whole lot of different sources, a radio podcast, a planning quarterly, which is a professional publication. So things like that to get them reading lots of different things and thinking about how it connected to planning. And then, yeah, the third year course, they had to, in their essay, again, like I said, go to this voluntary library session to inform the sources they were using for their essay. So you can see it's quite a different explicit focus on some of those skills we wanted them to develop, rather than just a test, an essay, a report, and exam. So that was the planning thing. Just make sure I'm not taking too much time here. Okay, next one, Patricia. The next thing, this is the source justification. So it was, how did you find the source? Identify 3 key points relevant to your essay. What's the reason you chose to use or reject this source? And then at the end of that, they had to reflect on their research process. What did you learn about information searching? Describe your search process for this essay, and what was the greatest challenge that you had? And so this came in 3 weeks before the essay. What we ended up doing out of this was creating a class list of sources. They had to find 10 sources each. From that, that was 5 sources. From that, the lecturer chose some really good sources they'd found and made a class bibliography. So any students who were struggling to find good information then had a resource at their fingertips with descriptions on why their teammates or classmates thought these were useful sources for their essay. So it was kind of a process that allowed them to, anyone who was struggling then didn't write essays with awful sources. They had some access to those. So that was kind of the kind of activities that we put into place to help enhance the information literacy capability. Okay, next one. So as I mentioned, information literacy spaces is the big project. I chose the picture from the start of the project. See how lovely and young and dark haired I look there at the front in my lovely cherry blossom shirt. We came out the end of it haggard, so you can imagine what the research was like. But if you're interested in this information literacy spaces, you can Google it and you'll see on here some of our publications and the Raru Whakarare framework that I'll talk about shortly. But this, like I said, was a collaboration partnership between school teachers, librarians, tertiary teachers and librarians. And the project we did slightly before this, we actually brought secondary school chemistry teachers in to talk to university chemistry teachers. They'd never had those conversations before. So then we really identified what the key issues in transition were and why we think my students can't do as first year students as to what the context that the secondary teachers were working in. So that was really cool to bring the teachers and the librarians together. And we really pushed the library as a space where student learning could happen. What a lot of the teachers or the librarians were saying was that the library was a place where they came when it was raining at lunchtime, where the teachers sent them to if they had something better to do. Just a place to do some homework, but was never a space of research and expertise in that space. So this is a really cool little project. So if you're interested in what we've been up to, please do go and check it out. I'm shameless plug there, but there's some really cool stuff on here. And there's stories here of what teachers actually did, how they changed, and what we're thinking about this information literacy space that we all inhabit, what that looks like. It's a big project. So research. So part of that project, I was a researcher and a participant. So my first year course that has 600 to 800 students a semester was part of the project. So what I did was I worked with the librarians. I had 3 librarians, business librarians that I worked with, and we created this online learning module. And so this became a week of study. The whole topic was about information and research. And so it was elevated to the same level as every other topic in the course. It wasn't an add-on. What we often find in LMSs is a link to the library stuff, but students never click on it. So what we did was we elevated this topic to be as important as any other topic in here. And part of this evaluating sources, we came up with this new Raru Whakarare evaluation framework. Just acknowledge Carla Jeffrey here from Ngai Tahu. And I went to Carla and we were looking at the metaphors. I think you've heard of the cars, the checklist, the crack checklist, all of those things. I said, we need a better business checklist. And we came up with charter. And we were doing credibility and all those kind of things. And then we sort of got that together. And I said to her, can we come up with some kind of Māori terminology that we could embed into this? We ended up throwing it out completely and starting with the Māori terminology that we came up with. So this is kind of an example of how we can get Indigenous languages and peoples to inform the way of thinking. And what's really cool about Māori culture is it is very holistic. And way more spiritual than Western cultures. So just an example here, the whakapapa is your background, it's where you come from, where your roots are. And so we talked about the background of the information. So what we've done here is pulled out some of those key pieces of information that most checklists have, but framed it differently. So what is the background? Where does it come from? The one that I love the most is mana, the authority. And the reason this is important from this perspective is mana is given, mana is not taken. So as academics, as Dr. Angela Feekery, I take authority. but mana has to be given to me. And I said to students, you give mana to your sources by citing them. Why do you want to give this person mana? You don't know the date, you don't know who wrote it. Why are you citing it? So it made a bigger conversation around what these things meant. And again, you can access this framework plus all of the descriptors and the questions that we ask students on our blog. This framework, since I've released it, has become quite popular in New Zealand. There was nothing like it with that Indigenous perspective. And the Raru Whakarare, the pattern you can see here, it's the name of it comes from the pattern, and it's basically all of the parts come together. So as individual parts, they're just hooks, but you have to bring them together to make the pattern. So we have to consider all of these things equally into when we're evaluating information. So that kind of framework came out of the research and then was embedded into my course to teach students. Okay, and yeah, so that's what I've been doing. So is there any questions or comments about these kind of explicit ways I'm trying to get this into my courses and visible for my students?
I love the infusion of the Maori culture with this material. I just think that's wonderful.
We've actually got a full Te Reo Māori version due for release very soon. I've had it translated and we're just looking at the descriptors getting translated at the moment. So we have some schools in New Zealand that are fully kaupapa Māori schools, all taught in the Māori language. So we're hoping that will get out there for those students as well.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, the reasoning and the logic, agreed. So last spring, I had a really unique situation in one of my MBA classes. One of the students that enrolled in the class was actually one of our business librarians. And she was taking the class because she thought if she's going to be a business librarian, she should take some business classes because all of her background was in library sciences and information technology. So she ended up in my class, and she became a fantastic resource for all of the classmates. And having a librarian embedded in your entire class is a wonderful experience. That's, you know, it was a great resource, and she was a wonderful sport about it. She put herself out there. She said, you know, you have any questions, give me a holler. You know, not a problem. So it was so convenient that people couldn't not go to her.
But I think what I didn't mention with this, sorry, is at the end of it, you can see there's a reflective survey. They have to reflect on what they learned from working through the module. And then in the next assessment, with the group task, they have a sources consulted table they have to fill out where they use this criteria to say why they selected the source. And then in the final reflective assessment, again, we talk about what did you learn about information. So it comes at 3 points in the assessment following this module being taught. So it's not just forgotten after this 1 week.
What sort of comments do you get back from the students? What sort of feedback?
Yeah, for something like the student, we have some students who are not taking it as a first year course, and one student said in the reflective part, so the reflections are really good, but she said, you know, it really, a process that she already had, but it gave it a name and it gave it, so she kind of knew how to evaluate, but she couldn't have articulated how she did what she did. So this, having a process like this allowed her to articulate that. Some of the students, what we found when they talked about their sources, if they used the Māori terminology, all 5 were mentioned. But if they used the background or the origin or the bias, only 2 or 3, and they focused on author, date, and content. So that was interesting. And this one here, it's a business course, and this is around professional information sources. The other first year core paper does academic sources, and they also use the framework. So both core papers are referring to the same framework. So it's not just in one course. The only problem we have at the moment is our 2nd and 3rd year teachers don't really know about it. So if they come to 2nd year and say, hey, what's the mana of this source? They're going to go, what? So that's the next step, is how do we get our 2nd and 3rd year teachers to buy into this and understand what students say when they're talking about it. Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting with the maramatanga, it's a little bit small here. Maramatanga is content, and we know that students focus on the content. It says what I want it to say, so I'm using it. But maramatanga is about enlightenment. How does reading this source enlighten me and enhance my understanding of this topic? So it's not just about what it says, it's about what it does to your knowledge and your inner self. So that's, yeah, you can't get that from the English word content. So yeah, we're just really excited about this. So hopefully it gets
This
used.
sounds like it has just so many possibilities. It's sort of, I'm actually quite jealous that I'm not in New Zealand. It's, I mean, the way that the culture is embedded into the academic work and the links and the connections, and I mean, there's probably a lot better Maori words to explain this. I mean, I mean, straight away, I'm having aha moments. So I imagine the students just have these amazing aha moments. What are you doing with the reflections from the students?
So we sort of just look at those and they get assessed. They get the reflection at the end of this week just helps me look at what I need to bring up in the workshop the following week. So we bring the framework back into the next workshop, and that's when they're starting their team assessment, and we get them to find some articles about team collaboration and apply it to the framework in class. So any who miss doing this online still get it foisted again the next workshop as well. So it's really to help us understand. And we noticed too that they were talking not a lot about bias in the reflection. They're saying it's Microsoft, therefore it's a reputable website. But like I think Martin said before, they're trying to sell a product. They're not going to give you the bad side of their product. So when they say, oh, we trust that it's reputable because it's Microsoft, then we can say, you know, what is Microsoft? That's where you need user reviews of the product as a balance against the bias that's inherent. And so it's not saying that bias is bad. I say we all have it. We're all biased. I cite sources in my research that I know support what I'm trying to argue. I'm not going to cite the stuff that says my research is crappy. So I said there's bias in everything, but does that bias have an effect on it? I don't want to take up all your time. We need to get on to what Patricia's been up to, but we'll come back to this at the end if there's time, I think.
Are you going to publish from this?
We've already got an article out. It's in the references at the end. And I'm doing a research this year on how people are using it and responses to it. So that'll be coming out hopefully later this year.
Excellent.
Cool. So Patricia, over to you.
Thank you. I'm really excited about Angela's framework as well. So I like hearing about it. I don't mind that we spent time on that because that's one of my favorite things. And so for my context, I mean, you might have heard this yesterday from me if you were at that session, but I teach the business master's students and they're on a quarter system. So they're on 10-week blocks of courses. So it's quite rigorous, quite intense. They're taking 2 or 3 courses in that 10-week span. So it's a pretty high touch program. We see them for a plenary lecture, then we see them for a tutorial, then we see them for a team-based learning. So we see them 3 times a week for any course that we teach them. So what I found when I came into this program was exactly what Angela described. They may or may not have had a 50-minute session in their undergrad with a librarian, and that was it. That was the extent of their knowledge of doing any kind of research in that IT space. And so the other thing about our program is we have a lot of international students. So in our cohorts where we have maybe about 160 students, we might only have 1 or 2 domestic Kiwi students. So that's another component that they're coming from all of these different backgrounds. Some are coming from business backgrounds. Some are coming from, I even had some that have been pharmacists and are now doing the business masters. So we had this very diverse background. So I started to think of how can I bring them all together and not, again, assume what they know when they come in just because they're 22-year-old master students for the most part. And so the amazing thing was when I started really digging into this, and then once I met Angela, is that the University of Auckland is actually using that framework and has put that framework out for the last couple of years. So it was this really interesting, I had to email Angela and say, do you realize that we're actually putting this out for our students, that this is something that we're actually using? So that was really good. So we've picked up on that framework and brought that in. A lot of our librarians do this work for us, which, like Angela said, sometimes that doesn't happen at universities, but we're very fortunate that we do have those business content dedicated librarians. They actually lived in the business school for a very long time, and only recently that has changed, but they're always available for us and always available for our students. And everything moves very quickly, that they are good about staying on top of the various trends that are happening. And one thing that's very unique about my program as well, since we do have so many students that English is a second language, we actually have a whole team called the Business Communications team, and it's usually composed of about 4 or 5 people. that actually co-facilitate some of the sessions with us, depending on what our students need and where they're at. And so I have the luxury that I'm one of the few people that sees our students for 4 quarters. So I see them for the full first year of their program. And our programs are only 15 or 18 months, so they see a lot of me. So I thought, how do I take advantage of the fact that they see me that much and that I have an opportunity to actually build their skills versus, like Angela said, sometimes you don't know what's going on after your course. So I had a chance to really see them in 4 courses in a row to build up these skills for them if they didn't have them already. And so I was really looking at how we use our learning management system, which we use Canvas, and our modules to actually embed into our courses and come up with something that could actually be pushed out to all of our courses. So like Angela mentioned as well, that they could say, oh, remember what Patricia was doing, and it's already embedded in that course that's happening after my course. And so we have the luxury of that 15, 18 month where they're only here for 5 or 6 quarters that we could do that and customize that. I did run into with my undergrad students last year, which we have our main business streams are usually about 1,800 students broken up into 9 or 10 different streams. And so you have a fairly big teaching staff or team teaching. So that is a little trickier, that it's hard to fit all of this content in. So it was a different experience seeing those first year students that are coming in. And again, like Angela said, what have they learned previously in secondary school? We learned was not what we expected or what we assumed they already knew about this. And I remember I got up in front of my undergrads and said, okay, so you'll be referencing, and I made all these assumptions about what they'd be doing for their research essay. But since we teach across so many streams, the content's very set. We're not able to really customize a lot of that. So I ended up going quite rogue, spending a lot of that session going through and showing them different resources we had and where they needed to go and what they needed to do, just to make sure they had that foundation. So it's a bit of a mix between my undergrads and my master's students. But again, kind of the luxury of my master's students is they have time with me, and I don't have to assume what they know because I have time to spend with them. And so looking to the future, really based on learnings from my courses, is something I want to spend more time on and spend more time with our teaching team to say, what did I learn from the original model that I walked into, where it was bring the librarian in, maybe they talk, they put up Google Scholar, and we move on and we go through our day. And so some of the student feedback and reflection I've received is really similar to Angela, that I've had the students reflect on this and what they've learned. And what I've found from them is that they said it wasn't only helpful for my course, it helped them with the other 2 they were taking that quarter, as well as what they went on to take. And a lot of times they were going back to the resources we had given them or the discussions we had had to look at those again. And so that was really helpful and really good feedback. And one of the really formal assessments that I gave them early on is that I had them do sort of an annotated bibliography. And so what I had them do is go through their resources pretty thoroughly and tell me why they were using them, why they were good, why they were applicable. And that was a really good exercise for them, because a lot of them said they'd never been asked to think about why they used a resource. And even if the answer was, Angela's a wonderful researcher, and that's why I used it, because I've seen her present and I knew she'd talk about what I liked. That was fine. That was a great answer, and they could do things like that. And I think one of the concerns I have kind of going forward is that before and after process, much like Angela said, what they're consuming prior and what they're consuming after they leave me is sort of that space I'm in right now. So a couple of things I just wanted to show you really quick, a couple of screenshots. This is from my master's HRM course that I just taught. And so we've really embedded those modules for them. So when you drop down into library resources, useful links, there's a lot of information for them there that we go through with them and spend time with them on. Helpful lit evaluation resources. So for this particular course, they were doing a lit evaluation, and they really struggle with that because they don't even know where to begin to start finding resources. So we spent a lot of time with them in this course going through that, as well as they had a big research project that they did. So providing separate resources within our LMS and within their modules, rather than a librarian came and talked and went away and we never saw them again. They had access to this all quarter, the whole time. I was referring to it in every single session. And I think that was really helpful to really embed that for them. And as well as if they're working on this at midnight, which we all know they write their essays well in advance, they're not doing it the night before, that they actually had access to all of this where they go, oh, Patricia did mention something about that source and what was it? They could go and everything was there for them, which they really liked. And they liked that they had that. So now I've heard from them that when they move on to other courses, they go, oh, it's annoying because I have to go back to your class to get that resource because it's not in this one. And so it's really making sure that that journey and articulation is done for them as well. And so this is another professional development course I teach for them, where we're talking about leadership and other components and teamwork that I, again, make sure that library and resource support button is actually embedded in my LMS tree, which I think has been really helpful and very consistent for them. So this is the course that I see them 4 times across that year. So I keep a bit of consistency in how I design that course so that they always know where they are. And if I'm adding things, they always know where they are for that kind of IT experience. And then finally, like I said, we have a very comprehensive library that's very involved with our programs, which is great because they stay on top of all of these things when I don't necessarily always have time to update. So we do have this really nice Learning Essentials portal that our students have access to, and we make sure they know that. So about finding information, reading effectively, presenting, basically everything is there for them. But this finding information is really good in that they can actually go to those different information types and start learning more about that. So we have them do a lot of those exercises early on so they can start to get that feeling and have that discussion. So before we move on to our next portion, which is a discussion amongst ourselves, I just wanted to see if there's any other questions you have for Angela or I before we move on to talk a little bit more about your context.
Nope, stunned to silence. Excellent.
Stunned with silence.
Stunned to silence. Excellent.
Okay, sounds good. So what we want to do next is I'm going to pop you into just a couple of breakout rooms, probably only 2 rooms based on how many people we have here today. But what we want you to talk about is really using your own context. So like Angela talked about earlier, really that shared understanding. You know, what kind of opportunities are happening, but maybe not actually called IL development? Or maybe what assessment activities could be modified. So Angela showed you that side by side of how those were modified. And I think that's a really good display of what we could be doing to start creating some of those different activities. Considering some new assessments, maybe identifying some training that might be needed, or maybe considering some options for your teacher-librarian collaboration, which is something that I use quite a bit. And again, even co-facilitating a lot of sessions together, it never happens that I just bring in the librarian and she talks at my students. That never happens in my classroom, that we're actually teaching something together. And there's a lot of context that wraps around that. So thinking about ways that maybe you can overcome that digital divide as well in our context, and considering how this impacts our online teaching and how that might be different. And so I'm just going to stop sharing and start setting up our breakout rooms for us. And as well as we'll share in the chat of the breakout rooms, I'll share a Google Doc with you. So if you just want to have someone in your team, just kind of pop in some comments of things you think of so that when we come back together, we can have a little bit of discussion there as well.
What time are we going to have to finish this since we started
And
late?
so I think we're only going to be able to give you about 10 minutes in your room. And then I think we'll need to bring you back, just based on the time that we have left. So I will pop you into your breakout rooms now and then share that doc out to all of you. And then we'll bring you back in about 10 minutes. Any questions before we release you out into the world? Okay, sounds good. You should get an invite to that room now, and I will pop that document in the chat for you.
We're back.
Welcome back.
Hi.
We had a little bit
we
of
got
technical
4
issues,
minutes.
so Zoom was not allowing me to enter any of the rooms. So I apologize. I would have came to see how you were doing in there.
It's okay. We were talking about you. You didn't need to come in.
Oh, okay, that's good. It was probably
Yeah,
best
yeah,
then.
there's a special option in Zoom for that.
Right.
Okay, so I know we just have a couple of minutes left, so I just wanted to see if each team just had someone who wanted to give us a brief summary of their discussion from each one. So maybe we'll start with Lisa, your group.
Sure. So we decided that each one of your bullets could be a thesis. So we picked one and focused on it. And the one we chose was identify training they need to support learners' IL development, their learners' IL development. And the first question we had was, who is there? Is it the faculty or the students?
Yeah.
Okay, so we divided into 3 categories: trained faculty, trained students, and trained administrators. Okay, now the administrators we ran out of time, so we didn't get past bugger off. But
that always happens in these. We always think, oh, 10 minutes, we'll get so
yeah,
much
no,
done.
well, yeah, but it was less than that because we got the document late. But so so the training of faculty, there's a lot of new developments in information literacy, and I don't know that faculty are up to date on them. And I think it would not hurt to we thought it wouldn't hurt to begin by training faculty on what those new developments are. And not to say that everybody's going to embrace all of them, but you can glean things from them that might be usable now or in the future. But knowing what's there is certainly a start. And then we get to training students, which of course was the longest list. And you can see it's right there: how to navigate an online database, how to narrow a search, how to assess quality of sources, understand what's a credible source and what's not and why, how to read a scholarly article. Melissa and I actually published a brief article about this last year in Management Teaching Review. Was it last year, Melissa? I don't remember. I think it's 19 or 20. It's either late 19 or early 20.
Yeah.
But and teaching students how to do that. How to narrow a topic focus, citations and references, why to use them other than you're going to fail the course if you don't. Okay. When to use them, how to use them. I'm amazed even my master's students need a refresher. No, I'm not amazed. I give them the refresher. How to use a range of sources. We've noticed that there tends to be an over-reliance sometimes on 1 or 2 key sources. I don't know what my last thing was that I wrote. How to enter the disciplinary conversation. Yes. Anonymous. Okay. How to enter the disciplinary conversation. I think there was another one that just got typed over that was how to narrow the topic. Oh, no, that's above that. Okay. So these were not in any special order. We didn't have time to organize them. We just were, spouting them out and typing them up. So
I think you're right, though. Each one is its own thesis, right?
Absolutely. So that's kind of what, and then of course, what are we going to train the administrators on? Well, we had a whole long list of that, but we just summed it up with 2 words. And
Angela, I think you might be muted, maybe.
Sorry, the administrators too, it's recognizing the value and importance of making this explicit, having information literacy as a graduate learning outcome, putting it in that space where it matters. And therefore you have to show, if it's a graduate outcome, you have to show in your courses how you're working towards that.
Sure.
If it's not part of that graduate learning outcome, then they don't care. So you've really actively trying to get this into where it matters so that you've got accountability.
Yeah, we have it at our university as a programmatic outcome. We have an information literacy learning objective as a programmatic outcome. I don't remember how it's phrased off the top of my head. I just know it's not one of the 14 that seems to be assessed in my class.
Okay, great. So Melissa, your group, I think.
We never really got to the document at all.
Just touched a couple things I was hearing.
I probably sidelined us because I am teaching undergrads who come from a very disadvantaged background, and to get them to even read the textbook, never mind, say, a journal article, I just try with class activities and my bring your news story in, and I've learned to say, okay, and it has to come from a source that is okay. Tell me about it. Even getting them now that we're all online, they have to post, they have an area that they can post it in and explain why they think it's important. The most significant thing that I struggle with, that I've gotten some ideas, is how to get it, while we were talking, was how to get them to understand that they can't just spout an opinion, that they do need to support their arguments. And yes.
Found it.
Yeah.
It's actually an exercise. It's actually a class exercise.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was published in Experiential Exercises. And no, Melissa and I were not the editors in charge of our submission.
No.
They wouldn't let us do it. We kept asking.
We weren't thinking that. We weren't thinking that.
We kept asking if we could just guide our own paper through, and we were told no, absolutely not.
That's right. I'm shamelessly plugging my research today too, so more power.
Listen, I got to run. Thank you so much,
too.
ladies, and have a great conference.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Lisa. Thank you, Melissa.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, so if we just sum up quickly, I think a couple of things that come out of it for me. The two key words are visibility and resourcing.
Yeah.
So how do we make this visible? How do we make it explicit? And then how do we resource it through materials and resources that are meaningful to the students to use?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's the main kind of key points for me is, we have to actively and explicitly embed this in our courses for students to develop these skills as we want them to.
Exactly. And I think, as you've alluded to, that consistency across the programs would be really ideal, so that when they do refer back to a framework, everyone is on the same page, knows what they're talking about. We're all using the same, so that it just makes it a bit easier for them to apply it and use it. And it also, I think, would be helpful for the other instructors as well, to not have to source something separately or have something that might confuse the students.
Yeah.
So then we do have a few references for you at the end of these slides, which will be shared, as well as we wanted to provide you with those additional resources. So like Angela talked about, the blog, that IL Spaces blog, that evaluation framework, and then I popped in a couple of the University of Auckland resources just to give you an idea of more of our formal library resources that we're using. So Angela, anything else to add?
No, I just think we can go around each person and just say, what are you thinking as you leave the room? What have we? What's your final thought before you abandon us?
Good conversation. Yeah, I appreciated the conversation and the time, and yeah. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Martin, Heather, anything to add? Takeaways?
I think just the importance. It's something I've worked with before. I have a lot of things when I work with students competing for attention. And this has reminded me just how important information literacy is as well. And we'll certainly look at your framework, Angela, particularly.
Yeah, my colleague Ken talks about a pedagogy of information literacy. And he says basically if you put that kind of engagement with the information at the top, and then rather than the content focus, it's going to flip the way that you go about doing things and the point that you start from. So yeah, he's really interesting, but he works mainly in the secondary sector, getting teachers to change the way of just getting through the content.
Thanks, Martin. Heather, do you have anything you want to add?
I think it's been enlightening. I'm sort of kind of jealous that I can't use Angela's framework because.
But you can use it. I know there's someone in one of the Australian universities using it in a first year course that so I think it's a librarian's course, but looking at how different frameworks are being used and using it as one to compare it to. And I think the key message is the holistic idea. So if you've got your local people, if they have something similar, because I often find Indigenous peoples are very holistic. But I know with Aboriginal languages, there's many of them.
Yeah.
Which one do you choose?
You're in a very unique situation, and it's almost Australia's almost at the opposite end of the continuum, where that would actually be offensive for me to do something like that.
I only did it through the collaboration with Carla, who is Māori. So it was a collaborative effort.
And you guys
yeah.
have a lot more synergy of your Indigenous people.
We
than
do. Yeah.
And it is really embedded in our university values, our strategic plans. It comes through in everything.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point.
Ours is like a, you know, not only is the IT thing a Pandora's box, but that whole cultural thing is, yeah, huge.
Yeah.
And something that I respect, but it's like, it's not my, yeah. Totally.
I'm interested to see how many Māori students you have at the University of Queensland. We have a lot of our.
I'm on the Gold Coast. I think it's the second highest population of New Zealanders here.
I think the other sessions are starting. So
Okay.
Yes, they are. So
Get
I think
kicked
we'll
out.
go ahead and wrap up.
Boot you all.
Yes,
Kicking
I
us
was going to
out.
say Brian is coming. So
Yep.
okay, thank you everyone.
Thank
Thanks
you, everyone.
for attending. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.